Hello again, it's Chris Mackay, the camera guy, and today I am going to tell you Chapter 3, the tale of 3 Kershaw cameras, 2 surprises, and a possible explanation of how a design feature came to be. Alright, so Kershaw cameras. Kershaw was a camera company in Leeds in Yorkshire, founded by a gentleman called Abraham Kershaw. Lived from 1861 till 1929 and built up such a successful camera business that he was awarded the OBE and the CBE, the Order of the British Empire and Companion of the British Empire, I think. So anyway, Kershaw started out making wooden cameras, single lens reflex cameras. Were famous for their Soho and Marion. They made, sold them under those names. Single lens reflex, large format cameras, rather like Graflex, American Graflex cameras of the time. But the Kershaw shutter was a little bit more complex. And according to my camera repair guru, George Walsh, who's a Graflex expert, by the way, more prone to failure because they were more complex. So what's the saying? KISS, keep it simple, stupid, especially if you want it to last for many years. Anyway, to get back to the 3 Kershaw cameras. So Kershaw were doing fine, and then we went on through the 20s and 30s. 30s was the Depression. So I guess things went not too well. War came along, Kershaw did war work, making little bits and pieces out of metal, I think. I'm not quite sure, I would have to look that up again. After the war, they had their own line of folding 2 1/4 and 2 3/4 cameras called Peregrine and Curlew. Kershaw were really interested in bird names at that time. You don't know if the members of the management went bird watching in the Yorkshire Dales. Possibly they did. Anyway, they came out with their own cameras, and they're highly sought after now, but I don't have a very good opinion of them, and I might do another video about that. But then in, I think, 1954, they simplified things quite a lot and came out with a camera which is the Kershaw 110, and the clue to the maximum aperture is in the numbers. So the 110 camera had a maximum aperture of f11. You could also stop it down to f16. There was no facility for any different shutter speeds. It's probably about a 60th. It has an ever-set shutter. You just press it, it's on the front of the camera there. Capable of taking good pictures, actually, as long as the lighting's right for your limited choice of exposure possibilities. And it sold very well because it's sort of foolproof. It's fixed focus, you can't go too wrong, you just have to frame it. Looks nice, it's easy to do. So, following the success of this camera, Kershaw decided to put a better lens on the front of this very nice body. This is a beautifully made body. I would say, I'll give you a hint, up to German camera standards. So they put a different lens on it. Well, 2 different lenses actually. They put the first camera that came out, after the 110, the first camera that came out with was the Kershaw 450, maximum aperture f4.5, and very nice. And now it has a lens with a cocking shutter, and all nice and good, and quite a lot of shutter speeds in the German-made Velio shutter. The shutter speeds go I have to use my glasses here. I should, glasses. Go from a 200th, a 100th, a 60th, a 25th, sorry, that was a 50th, a 25th, a 10th MB, so everything you would really need. And they came out then with a rather less expensive version, which is the Kershaws 630 maximum aperture, you've guessed, 6.3. Simpler shutter, the shutter speeds are only 200th, 75th, 25th and B, but you can manage with that. Very nicely made camera. Alright, so that's the story of the 3 Kershaw cameras. Now we get into the 2 surprises. Actually, the first Kershaw camera I got was the 630, and bought it on eBay. It arrived, and here we go. I unpack it, it's closed, I look on the top, yeah, that makes sense. You press that little button there, and that opens the lens. But then you look on the top housing, and there's no shutter button. And then you look on the front, where there could be one, although that would be unusual in this type of camera, there's no shutter button. You look all over, you look underneath, you look everywhere, there's no shutter button. How do you take pictures with this? It's got a cable release, and I did read a review of this where the reviewer said, well, there is no standard shutter button, you have to use a cable release. Actually, that's not so. So anyway, I played around with this camera for ages, scratched my head, cursed a bit, went to bed, woke up the next day, started playing with it again. What's going on? There's no shutter button. And I'm just holding it and I heard a click. How did that happen? Look carefully, where are my fingers? What did I do? And I realized that there's a little cutout there on this part of the front that folds up, and if you push that in, that triggers the shutter. So that was a surprise. The Kershaw 630 is exactly the same. It's got the shutter release in exactly the same place. Cock the shutter, hold it nicely, that's good. That's a good way to hold a camera. Put it up to your eye and just press that. That actually works very well. Maybe it's more secure than pushing a shutter button there, where you could get a little bit of wobble. Alright, so that's the first surprise. The second surprise is later on I acquired a knack for isolate. I bought it because I saw it's got a rangefinder, non-coupled rangefinder, and I looked at it and I played around with it, and I sort of turned it over and looked at it and put it upside down and all the way around, and I thought, I've seen this camera before. And then I went and I got one of my Kershaws, and lo and behold, this has exactly the same dimensions. It's exactly the same, well, very similar pattern. It's the way you open the back, and when you open the back, the way you release the 120 spools, the way you pull it out, it's the same in both. So the second surprise is that Kershaw somehow copied Agfa. Whether they had permission to do that, I'm sure they must have done. They couldn't have just stolen it, but you know, maybe after the Second World War, British companies were allowed to have their choice of any German stuff they wanted to make. You know, a company in Leicester called Reed made a pretty exact copy of a Leica camera, which they were allowed to do, and a British motor company called Humber were offered the rights to make the Volkswagen Beetle, and went over and looked at it and examined it carefully, and declined the offer because they decided it was not a very good design. They didn't like the look of it, or they didn't like the way it was set up with the engine in the back, and no, we don't want to make that, it's rubbish. Humber don't exist anymore. Volkswagen, I think they're still around. Anyway, so that was the second surprise. Now, the thing that I began to think about was, well, why did Kershaw come up with this different way of putting the shutter there? And my first thought was it was to save money. Somebody in the factory thought, possibly a foreman or somebody, went in to see the boss and said, because you know, I mentioned that Kershaws were made in Leeds, and Yorkshire people have a reputation for being very careful with their money, very thrifty. And that's not just me saying that, you know. There was a famous author, James Herriot, who wrote these stories about the Yorkshire vet, became worldwide bestsellers, and he has quite a lot of stories in there pointing out that Yorkshire people don't like to part with their money. They want to hang on to it. So I got this sort of idea in my head that somebody went in and said to the boss, or, hey, boss, we can save a bit of brass here. Look, don't need to put in all that linkage going down there and out to front and into side. We can just do a little cutout there and just put a pivot and a spring to return it, and look, what do you say? I say, that's a very good idea, lad. We're going to do that. So that was my first thought. But then I thought, there's another reason why this happened. So the 110 was the first Kershaw of this model. So they already had the top housing already done. And then they decided to put a better lens on it. But then they would have had to remodel the whole top housing or drill something, and that's a bit too far over, it should be over there. And that's why they suddenly came up with, well, we're going to have to put the shutter release somewhere else. Where can it go? It can go right in there. So that's the story of the three Kershaws, the two surprises, and the possible explanation of how an interesting design feature came to be. Just to revert a little bit to James Herriot, I think James Herriot is possibly the only person who had a part of the country named after him, Herriot Country, in his own lifetime. Interestingly enough, his name wasn't James Herriot. His name was actually James Alfred White, W-I-G-H-T. James Herriot was his nom de plume. He got that name actually, he was an avid football supporter. He was actually, everybody thinks he was Scottish because in the stories he comes off as Scottish, but he actually was born in Sunderland, but he trained as a vet in Glasgow in Scotland. So anyway, he was an avid football supporter, did the football pools, which was a gambling thing that was big in England in those days. I don't know if it still goes on. He got the name of James Herriot from the goalkeeper for York City football team. He just looked at the name and thought, oh, I like the sound of that, James Herriot. So that's what he called himself for his writing. But it was really Alfred White. I had something else to say about money. There's a Yorkshire saying, I'm saying because I'm not the only person who's saying that Yorkshire people are careful with their money. Actually, I've never had any problem with Yorkshire people and money. I've always been treated extremely fairly by Yorkshire people. I bought quite a few cameras from camera companies in Yorkshire, and it's always been pleasant transactions. But there is a Yorkshire saying, and let me think. Hear all, see all, say nowt. Eat all, sup all, pay nowt. And if ever that is out for nowt, do it for the cent. So there you go. So that's the Yorkshire saying about money. I think that would lead you to have not a very happy life. You might have a lot of money, but not too many friends. To contrast that with a saying which originally was by Francis Bacon, although it's also subsequently been ascribed to Lady Astor, and I believe it was in the show Hello Dolly, and it's to do with money and manure. So Francis Bacon said, money is like manure, of very little use except it be spread. And that's true, isn't it? Money is no good if it's just hoarded away by a miser. It has to be out in the community being used, and that's how business works. as long as the interest rate isn't too high. By the way, William Shakespeare's father got into trouble for lending money at interest. That was a crime, it was usury. And John Shakespeare got into a bit of trouble for that. So that's another interesting, well, I think it's interesting observation. And that's the end of my story and the end of my observations, and I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, I hope I'll see you again for the next tale. I haven't decided what that tale will be about, but I'll think of something. Okay.